God has left us long ago. He no longer resides in the houses of worship, nor waits to receive man to purify them of their sins. So man, ever so proud, sought a way to right this wrong. So they went to work and made a new God with science, one that would purify them of all their sins. However, unlike the first God that purified them with divine waters, the new one cast them apathetically to the radioactive flames. Yet we cannot turn back, for our sins are too
You know when you see something and you just know it's beautiful? Something that makes you stare at it for hours. Maybe it's a car, a painting, or even a picture of yourself before you peaked in high school. But then you notice something. Nothing big, just something small. But all you can focus on is that one small detail. The car has weird proportions, which makes it look goofy from different angles. The painting has something weird in the background. The picture is you from 10 years ago. Oh God. No, just me? Alright, cool. Anyways, I find the problem happens to me the most when I'm watching anime. Yes, as you can probably tell, I do in fact get no bitches. But what I tend to find most annoying is when anime has anti-nuke and anti-war messaging. Listen, I know that it seems like a hot take, but I have Rain Man levels of autism when it comes to World War II history, which I'm pretty sure I got from licking ant poison off the cement as a kid. And that not only means I'm on a watch list, but it also means I can deduce poor moral messaging caused by the fallout of World War II, and quite literally the fallout of World War II in this case. Because not only does Japan play victim, but it also ignores its own hypocrisy in doing so. Since, you see, Japan dodges accountability like an absent father dodges alimony, mostly when it comes to taking any blame for the atrocities they committed during their stint with fascism. This has led to a sort of delusional idea that Japan was actually a victim and was simply trying to help other Asian countries break the yoke of colonialism, which would have seemed like a noble goal if you ignored the fact that all they were doing was setting up puppet governments in the areas they quote-unquote decolonized. This has led to some interesting societal problems in modern day Japan, which I'm not going to talk about, but instead why it drives me crazy when I see how it bleeds into anime. I think one of the best examples that comes to mind is the anthology OVA The Cockpit, which in the first episode, Slipstream, a Nazi pilot named Captain Erhard von Reinders, who was recently disgraced from abandoning a mission, is given a task to escort a captured B-29, which will be carrying his old mentor and his mentor's daughter, who just happens to be Erhard's ex-sweetheart. The plane will also be carrying an atomic warhead that will be used on a V-2 rocket to bomb London. Because who else would you want on this super important mission other than a disgraced pilot whose loyalty is in question? And will also be the only one protecting the best chance of turning the tide of the war, because of course. Anyways, the ex-sweetheart begs Earnhardt to let them get shot down because she doesn't want to be the cause of nuclear devastation. Stares into the fucking camera. Also, let me just double check the exact words she used here. Have humanity sell its soul to the devil forever. Earnhardt listens and lets the RAF Spitfire shoot down the B-29, which he then defeats and then states, let me just double check the exact words he used here again real quick. He says he's the man who did not sell his soul to the devil. Alright. So I know this might be hard to see past the fact that the good guy in this is a Nazi, but I've watched Drifters and that anime has Isekai Hitler as one of the good guys. So let's look past that and take a step forward to see what this episode's actually about. When we break it down, the messaging is pretty simple. It says that using nuclear weapons will unleash a destruction so great and so replicable that it would be like selling your soul to the devil for power and eventually lead to the destruction of humanity. Or another way that captures the meaning would be unable to put the genie back in the bottle. Overall, the episode's about being anti-nuke, and the statement on the surface is true. Nuclear weapons are extremely dangerous, so much so that ever since its invention, humanity's had nuclear apocalypse looming over its shoulder ever since. So you're agreeing with what the show is saying? What? No, weren't you listening? And who the hell are you? You're ranting in the middle of the street while staring directly at me. And to be fair, I thought you were going to attack me if I moved, so I've been stuck here listening to you rant about how a bunch of anime that are beloved by many people and also have moral messages that are easy to agree with, like war is bad and nukes will destroy the world if we aren't careful, and you're calling Japan hypocritical for that. Oh, well, right. You're not from 2026, are you? You can easily find troglodytes who think political assassinations and calling little kids slurs are good things. Also, they are hypocritical because of that messaging. Just keep listening. So, you know I said we were going to ignore the fact that the protagonist was a Nazi? Well, I lied. I'm not making you do a take backseat on that step that I made you take earlier because, I personally feel that you're saying a Nazi, the guys who are very big on the industrialization of killing quote-unquote undesirables and saying that these guys would have not dropped an atomic bomb is just kind of crazy. I mean, the real moral question here should be that, did Captain Earhart not sell his soul, or did he simply not have a soul to sell? Okay, so the director of the show used a bad character stand-in to talk about the moral implications of dropping a nuke. It's not like Japan itself committed any atrocities close to what the Nazis did, right? You really have a bad batting record when it comes to assumptions. During World War II, Japan would commit many horrible atrocities that would be, in many ways, on par with their Germanic allies. Thankfully for the Japanese, they just happened to be in the perfect time period where committing crimes against humanity were happening so often they looked like they were going out of fashion. You might be wondering, what horrors against humanity did the Japanese commit, right? No, I don't actually really want. I'm glad you asked. From mass killings like the Nanjing Massacre, where an estimated anywhere from 100,000 to 300,000 civilians and captured soldiers were massacred, to an estimated 20,000 to 80,000 rapes occurred, to the live human experimentation that was done by Unit 731 for the research of biological and chemical weapons, which led to the killing of over 200,000 people, mostly from contaminating cities to test diseases and chemicals. We should also throw in the Bataan Death March, which was one of the more well-known events demonstrating how the Japanese treated their prisoners of war. I'm assuming you understand the death part in the name is a bit of an indication of it not being good. Around 5,000 to 18,000 Filipinos, as well as 500 to 650 Americans were killed during this march. But hey, at least they didn't sell their soul to the devil, right? Since this video isn't about giving a bunch of detail of the overall Japanese human rights violation speedrun, I'm just gonna have to leave you guys with some books in either the description or the pinned comments that I've personally read through if you're interested, or you can wait for when I do my inevitable war crime / man-made atrocity tier list. With that said, however, I think I made my point. Okay, well, my day's now ruined, thanks for that by the way, but how does this relate to Japanese making anime that's anti-war and anti-nuke? Oh my god, will you... Wait, that's actually a good question. Are you sure you're the same guy as before? Yeah? Before I can explain how Japanese war crimes connect to anti-war and anti-nuke anime, I need to go into a quick tangent. Yes, I know this video is already a tangent inside a tangent, but stay with me. Humans have a habit of organizing the world into neat little timelines. We take messy events, slap some dates on them, and pretend we understand the cause and effect of everything that happened. It makes history easy for our tiny little lizard brains to process. But the problem is that just because two things happen around the same time doesn't mean one caused the other. Sometimes we group events together simply because they share a time period, not because they actually share a reason. You still haven't answered mine. The problem I have with these types of anime isn't the fact that I think anti-war, anti-nuke messaging is necessarily wrong. The problem I have is that it focuses too much on a correlation rather than the root problem. The point I'm trying to make is that when we think of wartime atrocities, we expect them to happen in the service of war, that they were to somehow serve a strategic, operational, tactical, or even moral justification for the purpose of war. But when you actually look at these events, that explanation falls apart. What strategic objective is achieved by massacring hundreds of thousands of civilians? What tactical advantages come from mass rape? What operational goal is served by wiping out villages with diseases and chemicals that would never go on to even produce a usable weapon? They didn't help win the war. They didn't meaningfully weaken the enemy. In fact, many of the times, they would actually be at best a waste of resources, or at worst, hamper their own goals. They were simply just atrocities. And to further prove my point, when you compare them to Nazis, you can see a stark contrast even more. When you look at things like the Holocaust or Lebensraum, they're monstrously evil and almost check none of the boxes we established before except for one. These things record to the Nazi ideology, and to them not committing them would have made them not Nazis. Both played heavily into racial superiority, increasing Germanic living space, and killing a racial enemy. I know, you're telling me that the Nazi upper echelon were just raving fanatical sociopaths? I mean, come on, I had no idea. Look at them. Don't they just look like good people? Okay, but it seems like you're just going on a schizo rant without actually answering my question about how this relates to anti-war anime. Silence? I was getting to that. When we explore the concepts behind anti-nuke and anti-war anime, we see a very strong cause and effect of how war or superweapons lead to widespread atrocities. Even though I've been harping on the cockpit due to how overt it is with its premise of preventing said atrocities caused by nukes while also ignoring the hypocrisy of using Captain Genocide as a main character. There are other great examples. Nausicaa Valley of the Wind and Akira both come to mind. Both are anti-war / anti-nuke anime that have heavily influenced the medium, with Nausicaa being the breakout anime for Hayao Miyazaki, leading to him to create Studio Ghibli, one of the forefathers of modern anime. While Akira, on the other hand, has had heavy influence on the cyberpunk genre and has led anime to seeing new heights on the world stage. And as you can imagine, they were also heavily influenced by the generations that lived during and that followed right after the nuking of Japan, which makes him an even better example to my whole point. This generational mindset that was developed by the people of Japan who had a unique experience of the bombings and or its after effects became the general perspective of how devastation and atrocities happened in the minds of the Japanese people. This very perspective is what most anti-war and anti-nuke anime take from, meaning they all have the same problem, that no matter what the reason, war and weapons of mass destruction are what leads to atrocities. In both cases, Nausicaa and Akira take place during massive declines in humanity that have been caused by weapons of mass destruction and war. In Nausicaa's case, it shows humanity on the cusp of extinction due to fighting a world war with superweapons, leaving only pockets of humanity holding on while nature has adapted to a new and inhospitable world that they created themselves. All while humanity desperately tries to cling on to what it once was. The movie focuses heavily on how humanity is no longer the masters of the world and they have to finally accept and start to adapt rather than control like they once did. Overall, the story hits two key points we should really focus on. First off, it covers how war will eventually lead to the destruction of humanity, or will bring us to a point where humanity can't even wage war due to how devastating the weapons would be, removing humanity as the de facto masters of the world. Secondly, it pulls heavily from Japan as an example of how humanity can prosper after being devastated and forced to demilitarize. After World War II, Japan demilitarized and experienced a massive economic growth period called the Japanese Economic Miracle that ended around the early 90s.
But the movie came out in the 80s, so they didn't know that would happen.
Demonstrating that without war, countries, and in a broader sense, humanity can thrive. Akira, on the other hand, takes a much different look at humanity and Japan while maintaining an anti-war / anti-nuke stance. Akira takes place in 2019 in an alternate timeline after Tokyo was completely destroyed without anyone knowing how or why. As you know, it was actually just a freak, just kidding, it was a human super weapon called Akira. This destruction of Tokyo would lead to the outbreak of World War III. After which, Tokyo is rebuilt as Neo-Tokyo, however it's now run by a corrupt government and facing massive unrest and terrorist attacks, which is, crazy enough, also controlled by the corrupt government. Okay, Akira? A little too real? The story ends with Tetsuo, who has become a superweapon, losing control and destroying most of Neo-Tokyo. In essence, making the point that there are some heights that humanity shouldn't reach for due to their destructive nature. This does a fairly good job of echoing the anti-nuke point made in Nausicaa, however the biggest difference is the perspective on a post-war Japan, in which Akira has a very disenfranchised view, which it pulls heavily from when you see the corrupt government as a stand-in for the Japanese post-war government after World War II. Wait, so let me get this straight. The whole point you're trying to make is that anti-war and anti-nuke anime are hypocritical because they're largely based off of unique atrocities Japan experienced during the firebombing campaigns as well as the atomic bombings, and because of that perspective, these stories often portray atrocity as something directly caused by war and nuclear weapons. But when you compare that to the atrocities Japan itself committed, you see a much more complicated relationship between atrocities, war, and nukes. And by framing things primarily through the Japanese experience, those realities often get unintentionally downplayed while reinforcing the idea that Japan was mainly a victim. What? No. But honestly, that's a great takeaway. Damn, I wish I thought of that. Then what the hell are you trying to get at? What was the reason for the war that almost wiped out humanity in Nausicaa? What? What was the reason for the war that ruined the world in Nausicaa? I don't know. What about Akira? We know a world war started after Tokyo was blown up, but why? What's the reason? Did a country think Japan was attacked by a weapon of mass destruction, or did somebody think Japan was working on said weapon? Let me ask you, do you believe there's ever been a justified war? What about the use of weapons of mass destruction? Is there no scenario that you can think of realistically that a weapon of mass destruction could be used, even if it would save millions of lives? When we look at the United States' estimated statistics of what would have happened if the invasion of the Japanese home islands would have taken place, they predicted that over 1 million soldiers would have been killed as well as millions of Japanese civilians. This idea of American losses was so accepted that hundreds of thousands of Purple Heart medals were made for this operation operational outcome, leading to America not producing any new Purple Heart medals for over 45 years, and even today, there's a potential chance that a new Purple Heart recipient can receive a medal from World War II. This isn't even talking about the potential after effects the invasion would have had on the nation, for Japan itself would have been split up into different occupation zones just like Germany, leading to a country that may or may not have ever been reunited. With all that said, the bombs being dropped pales in comparison to that reality. Well, I mean, the problem I have with this messaging from these types of anime is that they propose the idea that war and weapons of mass destruction is what leads humanity down this path of atrocities and destruction. However, as I've tried to point out this entire time, we all know that isn't true. What leads humanity down those paths is simply ourselves. Think about it. Most atrocities and genocides were not committed for a wartime purpose or with weapons of mass destruction, but out of hate and convenience with knives, guns, and chemicals. Japan is the best example of that, and that's what makes this so painful. Even with all that said, don't you think that having no criticism of war or weapons of mass destruction would be just as reductive, if not more, than some anime oversimplifying them? Quis custodiet hippos custodes. Okay, so what now? Quis custodiet hippos custodes. It's Latin for who will watch the watchman. A question first posed by 1st century Roman poet Juvenal. Okay, what does that have to do with anything? Well, think about it. Who actually holds the highest authority over people? The answer is nations. Nations are the highest authority we've created. But nations aren't gods. They're run by humans, which means that they've inherited the same flaws, biases, and capacity for cruelty that we do. And some of the worst atrocities in human history have been committed by nations acting with that authority. Which creates the difficult question, if nations are the highest authority, how do you prevent them from committing this kind of violence? Well, the simple answer is other nations. Sometimes the only thing that can stop a nation trying to commit violence is either the threat of violence or using violence itself. A great example of this is the fact that World War II might have never even happened if France and Britain were actually willing to use violence to stop early German expansion. The same conclusion rings true when it comes to nukes. Do you know how many times nukes have been dropped as weapons of war? The answer is twice, and they were dropped on Japan. We have dropped more nukes accidentally, thankfully none of them have gone off, on ourselves than on each other intentionally for war. What I'm trying to say is that even though the threat of nukes or how war will lead to the destruction of humanity makes for great morals in stories and shows, it turns out those things being so commonplace might be the only thing keeping ourselves at bay from acting out our worst fantasies. And here we are, sitting at the edge of an abyss, strapped together and constantly threatening to push each other off. Look at us. We have unshackled ourselves. No greater power, no divine authority. Instead, we've replaced it with just us. Flawed, curious, and terrifyingly inventive. And here's the final question, hanging over us as we sit at the edge.
God is dead. God remains dead. And we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves? The murderers of all murderers. What was the holiest and the mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off of us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred game shall we have to invent? Thanks for watching.